Hey guys, I hope you are still staying safe and healthy. Good job on getting this far into the semester. We just have a couple weeks left, so you are almost there. So hang in there, you are almost done. In this chapter, we're going to focus on the theory of evolution. I think this is a topic that's, commonly known. Mostly, people have different opinions about whether evolution is real or not. But in this chapter, we're going to present the consensus within the scientific community, which is also what I believe. I do believe in evolution and natural selection. So we're going to talk about some of the basics, and then we'll watch a video on the evidence for evolution. So we're looking at all kinds of evidence. And then we are going to just go through some of the important concepts or important things about evolution. Okay, first of all, you absolutely have to know who Charles Darwin is. Okay, so he came up with the theory of evolution and natural selection. He was a British man. There is a very short article about Charles Darwin on nature.com, similar to Gregory Mendel. It's a very short article, very easy to read. Just read it real quick and answer some of the questions. So, for example, where did Charles Darwin go to school? Which university? Now, since he's British, you probably know that it's a British university, and it's actually one of the top, most prestigious universities in the world. Charles Darwin was invited to a voyage on which ship? So find out the name for that ship. And during that trip, he really kind of consolidated his theory about evolution and natural selection. So that trip was very, very important. In the process to his accomplishment on forming this theory about evolution and natural selection. And the last one is what's the book that Darwin wrote, which presented his ideas on evolution and natural selection. And the first edition of the book was published in which year? So you can kind of gauge, how early this book was published. Just subtract that year and then the year you were born and see how much year or how much time has really passed since the first book was published. It's interesting that I actually was asked about that question during my PhD, because in order to get a PhD degree, you have to go through a process called your preliminary exam. So in the preliminary exam, you have to do a written test where all the professors on the committee have to come up with some questions. And usually you have half a day, all day to answer those questions. Now you're going to think, oh, wow, you are in the written test for all day. That's not an exaggeration. I was literally in the test from the morning all the way at night because there are so many, well, not exactly like very many questions, but think about this. You have 4 to 5 questions for each professor. And then I had 5 committee members. And each question is a very kind of complicated question. So you really have to think of all the aspects and then be very extensive on your answers. So you actually have to do a lot of research while you answer those questions. And then if you can pass your written test, you are going to go on an oral test where you will be put in a conference room with all the professors on your committee, and each professor will take the turn to ask you questions. So it's almost like, they're kind of grilling you on your knowledge. So it's a very nerve-wracking. And I remember that the professor asked me the question on the book that Darwin wrote. And back then, I was very, very nervous. And also, I knew the book, I knew the title in Chinese. But back then, because I was really nervous, I couldn't really translate the name properly to English. So I said I really couldn't remember the English name of the book, but I know the name in Chinese. So that was a little bit embarrassing. But just during that situation, it's really kind of hard to think of things clearly. But you need to know the name of the book. It will be on the test. Okay, so the first few slides are about natural selection. So the natural selection is a very important concept, and I'm gonna go through, some of the details about natural selection. So Darwin argued that natural selection was an inevitable outcome of three principles that operated in nature. And because of those three principles naturally occur, that makes natural selection inevitable. That means natural selection has to happen. So first of all, most characteristics of organisms are inherited or passed from parent to offspring. That we can all understand, right? Because most of the organisms perform sexual reproduction or even asexual reproduction. Both types of reproduction, the offspring inherit the genes and hence the characteristics from the parents. Okay. The second one, more offspring are produced than are able to survive. So the resources for survival and reproduction are limited. Okay, so that's also true. More offspring are produced, but the resources are limited. So you have more individuals than what a resource could provide. So that creates competition. So you can think about the job market, right? So the job market can only offer 50 positions, but there are 100 people applying for those positions. So that creates competition. So competition has to exist for natural selection to operate. And the third one is offspring vary among each other in regard to their characteristics, and those variations are inherited. So why do you think this is also necessary for natural selection to happen? Offsprings vary. So that means that they have different characteristics, which in turn means that some characteristics will be more favorable than others, right? So if we all have to play basketball, then you know that people who are taller have advantage, right, than people who are shorter. So we vary in characteristics, and some characteristics will make you survive better in the nature. All right, and then those characteristics, going back to the first one, are inherited from the parents. Okay. All right. Now, besides Darwin, there's also another scientist, Wallace, who also came up with the idea of natural selection and evolution. So almost in parallel with Darwin. They reasoned that offspring with inherited characteristics, which allow them to best compete for limited resources, will survive and have more offspring than those individuals with variations that are less able to compete. I know that's a very long sentence. So in short, because everybody's different, right? If you have a characteristic that makes you a more favorable characteristic, then that will make you survive better, right? Because you can compete for the limited resource better. So if you get more resources, then you will survive better. And consequently, you probably will have more offspring, right? Because longer lifetime, that means you can mate more, you can reproduce more, so you have more offspring. So that's what this sentence is about. People with favorable characteristics can have a better survival and also leave more offspring behind, right? And then those offspring will have the same characteristics, same favorable characteristics. Because the characteristics are inherited, traits will be better presented in the next generation. Okay? And this will lead to change in populations over generations in a process that Darwin called descent with modification. So again, if you survive better and produce more offspring, you will have more offspring in the next generation, right? So that means eventually, if you think of the entire population, there will be more individuals with your favorable characteristics in the population, and those offspring will again survive longer and leave more offspring. So over time, there will be a change to the populations. So individuals with those favorable characteristics will become more abundant in the populations. So that process is called descent with modification. All right. So there's a picture to demonstrate natural selection. Let's read the text first. Natural selection leads to greater adaptation of the population to its environment. So everything comes to fitness, pretty much. Okay, so fitness is how you can adapt to the environment and survive or reproduce better. So if you have a high fitness, that means whatever features, characteristics you have, you fit into the environment better. So again, that means higher survival, okay, and more reproduction and more offspring with your genes and your traits. Okay? So this case in the picture, it demonstrates how the birds develop different beaks in response to adopting different environments, and in this case, different food sources. So you can see this one is really big and pretty wide. So you can see it's probably pretty forceful too, right? In comparison, this one's smaller but thinner and longer, right? So it's more like a pointed at the end. So these are adaptations to different food sources. So this may be used to eat seeds or nuts, okay, that have very hard shells. So the very like the forceful beaks can open those seeds, open the nuts. But this one's probably for like a little insects. This is very good at capturing little insects. So because these birds use different food sources, so the individuals that have the best features that can help them obtain the food sources will be retained. Those characteristics will be retained. So over time, when you look at the population, the individuals with those features will become more abundant, right? So over time, the population changes. Okay, so because of natural selection, eventually evolution will take place because natural selection is the driving force that will make evolution happen. Can only work if a variation exists among organisms. Okay, so some people are kind of confused about this. So in order for natural selection to happen, the population, the individuals in the population have to have different characteristics. So we mentioned that in the previous slide. Otherwise, there is nothing, no choices for natural selection to select from, right? So give you a simple analogy. When you answer multiple choice questions, okay, multiple choice questions, I have to give you choices, right? A, B, C, D, for you to choose from. If all the answers are the same, there's nothing to choose from, right? So same thing for natural selection. Individuals have to be different. So maybe the beaks are a different shape and different length, and then nature will decide which one is fits better to the environmental conditions, right? Including food source or for example, escaping away from predators, things like that. Variations arise ultimately from genetic mutations. So we talk about everybody's appearance. Your phenotype is controlled by your genotype, right? All right. Now mutations do happen, and now we know that mutations can be good because it creates a variety in the genetic pool, and because of the genetic variety, animals, organisms have a different phenotypes. Okay? For example, different shapes of the beaks. So the different phenotypes provides choices for natural selection to select from. And then the natural selection will pick the one that can have the highest fitness, right? Survive better, reproduce better. And diversity is further encouraged through sexual reproduction. And why is that? Remember when we talk about meiosis, the sexual reproduction, we talk about a few things that will introduce genetic diversity, right? Crossing over, independent assortment, and then also you inherit genetic material from both your parents. Okay, so that all creates diversity. So that further creates variations for nature to select from. Okay. As environments change, selective pressures shift and favor different adaptations. So environmental conditions change, then you are going to have different selective pressure, right? So for example, let's say the regional weather is really cold in a certain area, like in area A, originally the weather is cold. So it favors organisms that can withstand low temperature, right? Withstand low temperature. Okay, so it might be something just to kind of easy to imagine, thick fur, right? Maybe maybe if it snows a lot, animals with the white color maybe camouflage better, right? But let's say there's some dramatic change, and now the weather is warm and humid. Now this is not going to work anymore, right? So you need organisms that can kind of release their heat very easily. Okay? Maybe thinner fur and maybe darker color. So there's not very little snow, so everything is a ground color, brown, dark. So maybe dark animals can camouflage better. So you can see if the environmental conditions are different, then you will likely have different selective pressures. So now the favorable characteristics also change. Okay? In this way, given thousands and millions of years, species evolve, right? If you give it long enough time, then nature will select, the species that can fit better. So that will create different species, new species. All right, so that's some basics about evolution and natural selection. So now we're going to look at evidence of evolution. So I found this video, I think it's more comprehensive, but when he was talking about DNA sequence, protein sequence, that's about molecular biology. Okay. So let's go down here. So the next few slides are all about the evidence which has been covered by his lecture, so I'm going to skip that. There are a couple concepts that you need to know. Under physical evidence, there's convergent evolution and divergent evolution. So it's very straightforward. So make sure you read these three slides, and understand the differences between convergent and divergent evolution. There are going to be some quiz questions in our assignment, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So on the test, I may have some examples. And then I'll ask you, does this example demonstrate convergent evolution or divergent evolution? He talked about embryology, the similarities in embryonic development across the different taxonomic groups of organisms. This one he didn't mention, but you can kind of read a little bit biogeography, so it's very interesting. So similar flora fauna can develop when they're quite far from each other, and that's because the environmental conditions are similar, so they kind of develop the similar traits or similar characteristics. Molecular biology is mentioned in the video, so we're going to pass that. Now, a few things about evolution. So first of all, it's not just a theory. Like mentioned in the video, there's a lot of evidence out there to just suggest it's merely a theory. It's something that has been proved over and over by a lot of evidence, a lot of data, a lot of observations. There are some misconceptions about evolution. The first one is, actually, I'm just going to use this view, is that some people believe it's individuals that evolve, but that's actually not correct. So it's actually populations that evolve over time. I use the draw function. Okay. So remember, it's the populations. It's not responding, so I can't really draw. That is very strange. Let me try one more thing real quick. Oh, there we go. Okay, so it's actually the populations. Still doesn't respond. Populations that evolve over time. So you focus on populations and not individuals. All right. So populations still consist of many individuals. So as individuals change, it will change the population overall. And think of evolution as something that happens to populations. Furthermore, these mutations either arise on purpose or do they arise in. So the mutations actually happen spontaneously, or you can say it more like a randomly, right? So there's no purpose. Mutations just happen. And it just happens that some mutations will give the organisms a favorable trait. Okay? So it's very kind of random. Then here, the last one, once the environment begins to favor a particular trait and now it works, then those individuals already carrying that mutation will have a selective advantage, right? So we have been talking about the selective advantage. And people with that, or individuals with that, are likely to survive better and outproduce others. So they have advantage in competition, so they can outcompete other individuals that do not have those traits. So eventually this is going to change the composition of the population, right? And that's what we call evolution. Microevolution. So this is a term that talks about evolution on a smaller scale. So it's defined as a change in the frequency of gene variant alleles in the population over generations. So this is about population genetics. So we'll have an assignment, like I said earlier, and in that assignment, you are going to watch a few videos on population genetics and answer some questions. Okay, so that will be covered by that. So here's the assignment. You are going to use the Jove website, and they have 4 chapters on evolution. Like I have a screenshot right here. So you are going to just watch the videos in these 4 chapters from 30 all the way to 33. Now each chapter consists of some very short videos. So those videos are about 2 minutes long, so it's very easy to get through. So watch those videos, and then you're going to go to the course, the chapter folder under coursework. There will be some Blackboard quizzes there. So again, for each quiz, you have 2 attempts. So the quiz questions are related to the information in each chapter. So again, watch the chapters and then finish those quizzes on Blackboard. All right, so that covers quite a few topics. It's going to reinforce your understanding of natural selection, which is related to speciation and diversity. We talk about evolution a little bit, so that those videos are going to give you a kind of quick overview on evolutionary history. And then you are going to have some videos focusing on population genetics. So that's more related to the frequency of gene variants and alleles. So all the following slides are related to population genetics. Okay. And then there's a very important term that you absolutely have to understand, that's called a fitness. So we have mentioned fitness before, so just do a little bit more reading and make sure you understand that. This will be covered by the videos on Jove website, so we're going to skip that. Sexual selection, this is very straightforward and it's very interesting too, so I'll leave it to you to read. Phylogenetic tree has been covered in the lab topic, so we're going to skip the phylogenetic tree.